Okay, it looks like we are live and people are joining, which is very exciting. Welcome to Well Published. I'm Aimee Liu, the founder of MFA Lore, and I'm so glad to have you here. Our topic today is narrative nonfiction, and my guest is Edward Humes. Ed is a Southern California journalist and author of 16 nonfiction books, most recently Total Garbage, How We Can Fix Our Waste and Heal Our World. And The Forever Witness, How Genetic Genealogy Solved a Cold Case Double Murder. He's also used human narratives to tell the stories of evolution, arson, education, neonatal medicine, and currently he's working on a book about soda, of all things. Ed's work has earned a Pulitzer Prize and a Penn Award, among other novels. So thank you so much for joining us, Ed. I'm really excited to do this interview. I think there's a common misconception. I've seen it in my students and lots of other writers that all writing breaks down to fiction, memoir, and journalism. And kind of sort of never the twain shall meet unless it's some hyper modernistic experiment. But the world of narrative nonfiction is a little opaque for writers, though people don't really realize we're reading it all the time. There's so many books now that are narrative nonfiction, and you teach this as well. So I'm really thrilled to get your take on it. I'd like to lift the veil on your genre here and
Lift the veil.
Lift the veil, call it narrative nonfiction 101, kind of. So let's dive in. People are still joining us. And
Great.
For those who are joining us, sooner or later, we will post the video of this at the end of the week, along with the transcript and summary. So no worries. You don't need to take notes. You can always come back and catch up later.
That's good.
So let's start, Ed, with just basic, how do you define narrative nonfiction?
Well, first, thank you for this invitation and for welcoming me so warmly to Well Published. And this is really cool. This is my first experience sitting in my backyard staring at my phone and talking to
Right,
people.
you're up in Santa Barbara. Lovely
Yes.
Santa Barbara today. Yeah.
It is lovely in Santa Barbara. So how do I define narrative? Now, it's such a broad category, and you already hinted at that it can encompass memoir, biography, true crime, which is my first forays into the genre after I left newspapers. Science writing, you name it. The narrative potential of all these genres is present. So it has many labels: literary fiction, creative nonfiction. It's literary nonfiction. Nonfiction journalism is the name of the course that I've been teaching for undergraduates. So it can be hard to pin down, but basically it's a hybrid. And it's a form of writing that uses the literary structure and creation of character and setting in a way that isn't that much different from works of fiction, but it's layered with expository material that tells the journalism side of the story. It's very hard to write pure narrative and that all remain nonfiction. So particularly on specialized topics like, well, garbage. It doesn't lend itself to graceful narrative all the time. But I guess the trick that I talk to my students, who are mostly journalism students or non-writers minoring in this course, is to think about everyday narrative storytelling, where even some element of a basic news story written in a conventional way can incorporate narrative elements that add a new dimension and bring readers into the moment, into the event, in a way that it's to their experience and their openness to the story.
Is it the same as new journalism, the term coined by Tom Wolfe back in 1973, or has it evolved to something different?
Well, it's both a progenitor of modern narrative nonfiction writing, but also a subgenre. And it's new journalism is very point of view centric. I mean, you think of the gonzo journalism of Hunter Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's very much told through his sensibilities and his character. Or oh gosh, I mean, one of my favorite of that group of new journalists, The Right Stuff,
Mhm.
is brilliant. Or Norman
Mhm.
Mailer's Executioner's Song, which is Pulitzer Prize winning monumental work of literature, is also narrative nonfiction. All those fit into the new journalism rubric, I think. Although we want to talk about what I think is the first work of modern narrative nonfiction, it would be Hiroshima by John Hersey from
Yeah.
1946, which I read as a
Yeah.
teenager because
Right.
my mother was I was 13 years old, and my mother was hospitalized in a room with one other person in it, an elderly woman whose son turned out to be the bombardier aboard the aircraft that dropped the bomb on
Oh my God.
Nagasaki, and how that had changed and deeply affected his life. Obviously, not in a good way. And for
Wow.
some reason, we ended up talking. This World War II veteran, a 13-year-old, and that led me to go to the library and get John Hersey's book, which is a classic about focus on
Absolutely.
6 survivors of the Hiroshima bomb blast, and it changed my life reading that book.
Wow. I was going to ask how you got into writing. Was that kind of the launch pad
Uh,
for this vein of
if
writing? I know you
I
were
did
you were a journalist first, but
it. No, I think my parents told me I started writing stories basically to when I could string a sentence together. So, mostly little science fiction stories, which was what I was into when I was a child. But no, this book stuck with me and was a touchstone for in a lot of ways before I really fully realized it. But I go back to it. It's, it accomplishes all the things that we want narrative nonfiction to do, and admitting readers to a world, to a time, to characters experiencing deep and important and moving events, and it makes us feel something. And that's the part
Mhm.
that narrative nonfiction adds to conventional journalism that's otherwise absent.
So do you think you were always trying to pull that into your journalism even before you were
No,
writing these books, or no? When did you
no.
make
I
the
mean, I was.
shift?
It's an evolution. I had a 12-year career in daily journalism, newspapers. And when you start out, at least as I did, it was at a community newspaper in Arkansas, a place that I had never been or visited before. I drove through on my way across the country and applied for a job, and I got the call back from Pine Bluff. And I covered little stories, community events, local government. It's where I first started writing about environmental stories, but I got a little taste of everything. And it was very basic journalism, but it was important. It was the lifeblood of the community there. And from that, when you have that kind of start, your focus, for me at least, was on accountability journalism, on exposing things,
Mhm.
corruption or wrongdoing or injustice, and writing that story. With the idea being, what formerly was the motto of the Washington Post, that democracy dies in darkness. I don't know what's going on there now, but
Yeah.
I believe that wholeheartedly, and the function of storytelling to preserve our democracy is vital. And but as you write in that genre, you start to want to do more, to tell deeper stories, and start focusing not just on the view from 30,000 feet, but the view down on the ground that these large events are affecting. And I started to realize that the power of telling one person's story that also explains a much larger truth about something that's going on in the world, whether it's in medicine or environment or crime, whatever, affects people in a different way than that investigative story that's just focused on the big picture. No. And
Also,
that was my
this
journey began with that.
yeah. So another element is the first person element. So you, in most narrative nonfiction, I guess not all, but in an awful lot of it, you are the first person. You get to be part of the story in a way that you typically don't in most straightforward journalism. Was that is that is that true in all of your books? I'm not sure. I think
It's
it's.
actually I've tried to assiduously avoid that as much as I can. Um, new journalism certainly was very much often had all the writer presence. I have only done that when on special occasions. I don't I don't think I appear anywhere in most of my books, but um, in
You're in
I de
the
I
you're in the
departed that.
last one, aren't you? In the Forever Witness, aren't you in there?
No,
I see.
no, I don't think so.
No, you're not.
Mm,
Gosh, I feel like you are. You're maybe to everybody who's here. Ed and I are in a writers group, so
yes,
I watched that book coming together, and it really felt like you. I felt like I was there with you, but so maybe not. Boy, but yeah, it is that perspective though is very immediate.
I think there's some scenes where I'm marginally present in total garbage. Actually, maybe that's the one you're remembering.
Mm,
Most strongly in my book, No Matter How Loud I Shout. That was the year in the life of
mm.
juvenile court, and part of my experiences there where I was kind of pressed into service to teach a writing class at juvenile hall. And it was impossible not to be present in those
Mm,
scenes
yeah,
and
yeah.
to present my recollections and impressions of what it was like being with these young people on the page from a
Mm,
first person perspective. But that was
yeah.
sort of a discrete element and apart from the
Okay,
overall narrative.
interesting,
So I'm not
interesting.
really comfortable with that, but sometimes it's necessary.
And yet, the perspective is it's so immediate. It is a kind of a you are there way of telling these stories. Do you have
Oh
a
yes.
particular set of keys that you use to unlock the narrative? Um, Especially in these large research based, science based topics. How do you find the story?
Well, so the name of my Substack is The Art of Being There, and that's the conceit. Um,
Oh, I forgot to mention. Yes, Ed has his own Substack. I should have said that at the
Well,
top.
that's a phrase that came up before Substack existed, but it kind of works. But mostly you have to be it's being the fly on the wall. It's being present, not necessarily being part of maybe part of the furniture. That's the goal
Mhm.
sometimes. But to actually be there to experience and observe place, people in their non-performative moments and it's just being themselves, and that's really an investment of time for starters. I mean, I literally did spend a year haunting juvenile court with initially with not even sure where the story would take me or which characters would draw into focus. I figured that out
Mm.
pretty quickly though and realized where I needed to be, but it took a bit, and it took some wheedling and cajoling and getting a court order and all kinds of other things to get into these spaces and to get people to sign off and having me present without exerting control over me, or at least other than observing certain privacy restrictions. And then for me, that's always the key, getting access. And, as a newspaper journalist, it's primarily the public's right to know. And for these kinds of works, it's the public has no right to be there. And so figuring out if I can get that access and then how to get it and the responsibilities that attaches to you when people are exposing themselves in the way that they sometimes do for these stories. That's all part of figuring it out. But the first and foremost is getting access. And for the Forever Witness with the genetic genealogy, true crime book, it was earning the trust and the openness of the main character in that story, the detective who finally solved this old murder
Mhm.
case.
Mhm. So
Being
before you
being
get
present
that
in these
access,
characters' lives, that's how you
yeah.
begin to do what a novelist does with their imagination. Although every good novelist is going to draw on their own life experiences and characters that they've met and tap into that. not that different a process, really, I suppose.
Mm. But I presume that these books are all sold off proposals in advance or
Yes,
before you get the access. So
yes.
something comes first. What comes first? How do you identify what you're going to be writing about, where you're going?
Now
Take us
that's a
back to the
very,
beginning of the
but
process.
I'm going to say usually I do have at least some measure of access before I sell the book. Because, otherwise I have to say, sorry,
Yeah,
here's your money back.
exactly. Yeah.
Uh, don't want to do that. For instance, all right, let's say Mississippi Mud is my third true crime book. Excuse me, let me get a drink here. And it is about a unsolved murder in Biloxi, Mississippi. In fact, the murder of a sitting judge and his wife, who was the leading candidate to be mayor of Biloxi and was a sitting city council person. And this was a town known for its corruption, for um, police department not always being able or willing to solve certain crimes that stepped on certain toes. And their daughter, the murder victim's daughter, began her own investigation. She was a nurse, not a detective, someone who could not bear to have the deaths of her parents go unpunished. And I read about this case in a story in the New York Times, and it mostly posed more questions than it answered them, but that this controversy was roiling the town of Biloxi. Um, and I was so taken in by this story and what hadn't been told and hadn't been said that I picked up the phone and called information and found this woman's listening and cold called her in Raleigh,
The
North
daughter?
Carolina, where she had the daughter. And I introduced myself and said why I was calling and who I was. And we ended up being on the phone for 3.5 hours. And I was on a plane the next day. And then once I had met with her and spoke with her and figured out that this was an epic of
Mm.
of corruption and Southern culture and organized crime and had all the elements of a story that would anyone would be interested in. That's when I pitched it. So I did dig in before I committed myself. But and that's so
Interesting.
that
I
I
mean,
mean it can happen almost anyway.
right,
That was
right.
just something I read.
Yeah. And
And I was
so,
lucky, she didn't boom and hang up the phone. So,
yeah, exactly. Well, and cascading, obviously, you got access to a whole bunch of other people, some of whom probably didn't want to give you access.
yeah. Well, I mean, some of them were in prison. I don't know if you've seen the movie JFK. There's a scene at a prison in Louisiana, and the attorney goes there and meets with the president. You see the scenes of the uniformed guards on horseback with shotguns. That's the prison I went to visit a guy named Kirksey McCord Nix Jr., who was the mastermind from behind bars as a lifer without parole of all these criminal enterprises. And he
And he
basically
talked to
owned the
you?
place. Oh, yeah. Because he figured
Wow.
he was a scam artist, among other things. So he figured he could just talk his way out of anything. What he was really doing was amassing money to buy parole in Louisiana, which is also not unheard of.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Oh my
great
God.
story, right? Anyway, I
Yeah.
mean, that's yes. So people like that also became characters in this story. It was an interesting journey.
Okay, so let's get into the kind of the nitty gritty of how you do this. We were talking before we went on air about sort of how you construct scenes, narratives, story like scenes on the page when you weren't there to witness them in reality. And this is particularly dicey, I think, for people who are writing historical nonfiction, biographies, or other books like Sorkin's 1929. You've got a list of your favorite books that are
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this. But, and I guess you're working on this book on soda right now, which goes back a way. So how do you how do you create a scene? I know how you do it if you're a fiction writer. You just make up and you construct the scene and figure out the details that are, most effervescent. But how
Yeah.
do you do it when you're dealing with nonfiction? It's got to be true. It's got to be factual. Where's the bend?
Well,
How do you do that?
I learned that part when I was in newspapers. And since one of my major areas of coverage for half my career there was covering the courts, trials and crime and civil cases. I knew the legal system well. The first thing you find out is that everything is documented. Want to know what a
Mm.
crime scene looks like? There will be extensive narrative reports by forensics experts, detectives. There'll be crime scene photos, witness accounts. You have all the tools you need to recreate moments, times, scenes, interactions. If you want the trajectory of bullets, everything is revealed in a way that is so much more richly detailed than most people's imaginations can
Mm.
possibly do. And then you have live witnesses in the courtroom being cross-examined about what was said and when and how. So yes, you can. I My practice is to provide sourcing at the back of the book, or how I know things, and what can be reconstructed through what source material. So my readers can know that I don't have a time machine, but I do have this material that allowed me with confidence to write at least a version of a past event I wasn't present for.
Right.
And journalism,
And
of course, is filled with recounting moments that the reporter wasn't present for. So
right. But there you always assume that it's off of documentation, that they're being,
yeah,
faithful
well,
to
same.
that. Same
That's
thing?
what that's
Oh,
what narrative nonfiction writers do if they're doing if they are really being journalists about it.
yeah.
There's great works of narrative nonfiction like In Cold Blood is kind of the classic example. Truman Capote's wonderful book. I love that book. As a work of journalism, it's been questioned that certain
Mm-hmm.
things were done more for the dramatic effect than the
Mm-hmm.
actual nature. So that does happen. I feel like it's okay to do that if that's what the writer wants to do. They should then be labeled as based on a true story, but not a true story.
Liberties were taken. It's a big issue with memoir, especially because lots of memoirs take lots of liberties. And of course, Vivian Gornick's famous, situation and the story, and also her liberties that she took in her own memoir, caused legendary controversy in that realm. And memoir is narrative nonfiction. It's a form of narrative
It is,
nonfiction.
and
So,
I think there's an understanding that it's based primarily on, the memoirists' own
memory.
recollections. And
Mm.
if you are at all familiar with the criminal justice system, you know that eyewitness testimony is the absolute most unreliable testimony there is. People think, oh, there's no eyewitness. What good is its case? It's over 50% of people wrongly convicted who are later exonerated by DNA were, adamantly made to sound guilty by the eyewitnesses. It's just the nature of the human mind. We're
Right.
not recording machines, and being aware of that as a narrative nonfiction writer, I do like to have corroboration. If I'm going to recount a past conversation, I talk to everyone I can who was present for that conversation and see where they align. Or how do you do the scene if they don't agree on what happens?
Yeah.
Um,
How
what
do
I
you?
Well, in some cases, you can rely on third party evidence and really whatever recording, but other material that proves the lie, so to speak, of one over the other. Sometimes it remains in dispute, and then I use those endnotes to indicate that there's various versions of what happened at this particular juncture. People have
Right.
told me they love going back and reading the endnotes because some of them get really long to explain this stuff, and
Mm.
my publishers hate that. But sometimes they like the lawyers at the publishing houses love it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and most readers, if they don't like it, they can just skip it, and if they want the
Yeah.
nuance, it's there.
Yeah. And there's also, the story belongs to the victor too. You've got if you've got power discrepancies coming out of an event, then you've got the unreliability of historical record too. Have you ever run into that where you've?
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, I mean, I can't even think. I'm looking at a lot of scholarly papers from the Gilded Age era, 19th century writings, science writings, in which the works of others are quoted. And these are, academic treatises and books, and they're wildly wrong. I mean, if I go to the source material, it says none of those things. Thank God for the Internet Archive. It's like
Yeah.
a world of ancient literature is. But yeah, it's a little disheartening to find out how very respectable source material from the past, no doubt from the present as well, needs to be fact checked.
Yeah.
So
And tough to do. I mean, dialogue too. I would even if you're using dialogue from original sources, that dialogue is not necessarily terribly reliable either. So, I mean, do you ever are you I can't imagine you're not tempted to make up dialogue at times. You really never do it?
sometimes there will be. No, I don't make a. I don't purposely make up anything. I rely. If I decide a source is credible, I will invest their recollections with credibility. And if they're recalling a conversation that others are not denying, I feel comfortable using that and showing, in those endnotes, showing the source for that information later on, as told by so and so. Um,
Mm.
I don't, I don't spoil the flow of a narrative by sticking it right there as I would in a
Mhm.
newspaper, if there are long quotes say, according to blah, 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 because
Right,
it just
right.
is a stopper.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think one of the rules of narrative nonfiction has to be judicious use of quotes that you weren't present for. I don't do a lot of them, but
Mm.
ones I feel where I'm confident. Or if it's, what do you do with a historical figure? You have their letters. That is their voice.
Mm.
I use that material when it recounts conversations with their peers and indicate the
Mhm.
source for it, but I'll present it in a narrative as a scene. Yeah, I'll do that. I think there's no rules for this other than the ones we observe. Those are my boundaries. But actually making up dialogue, I think fits what somebody would say. I just paraphrase it. I don't use
Mhm. Mm. Mhm.
quotes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Things when I know characters were interacting and what the result of that conversation is, I'm not going to make up dialogue for that. If I sell the book for a movie, somebody will, no doubt, but I won't do it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Character. I mean, in fiction, one of the things that has always struck me as most important about creating characters in fiction is the divide between the selling and the telling.
Yeah.
All of us are selling something. We're selling a version of ourselves that is not necessarily accurate or true if we were telling the truth about ourselves, and that duality, of course, is part of what makes fiction very dynamic. But it's true of people. I mean, we're all posers in a sense. And if you go back into historical character portraits, how do you navigate that? I mean, you're working primarily, I would imagine, with the record of what has been sold as the profile of a character. Do you have secret ways of kind of digging beneath that and finding out what the truth is?
No,
Or
there's no. Well, I mentioned the Internet Archive as being a valuable resource. It's invaluable, and material is highly accessible now that used to be very time-consuming to find, and to the point where, depending on the importance of the character in the story, it was not worth investing in. Now it's at my fingertips.
yeah.
And so if I want to know what Pliny the Elder said about soda, he was an early fan.
Oh
Uh,
my
that's
God.
very early. I can. I do have to rely on translations because I don't speak Latin, but I'm assuming that multiple translations of these works are accurate. I can use his original words um, and thoughts on it as he related them. So yeah, I mean, there's the tools that are available now to recreate the thinking and actions and ideas of past characters, and unfiltered is never been better.
But the volume of research is overwhelming, I would think, and especially because of the internet. How do you have like some secret for organizing all of the research when you're doing these?
No,
That's
but if
like
anybody out there
one.
has one, uh, I, you know, I use what tools are available for digitally to keep my material organized. But yeah, it does become overwhelming, and I end up having to reread and refresh constantly with things
You
that
don't
I
have some.
I knew
Tom
and then
Bissell had.
lost.
Yeah,
Um,
Tom Bissell had an elaborate indexing system that he told me about when I worked with him at Bennington. And, sort of you index for character and you index for place and you have all of these cross references. And I don't know, it made my
I,
head explode.
I keep digital or files for my characters with the related material and their places there. But then, yeah, when there's overlapping, then it becomes a little challenging not to overwhelm yourself with the organization itself. I do have a lot of material for this book I'm working on that's not digitized that I got from family, um, old letters and journals, really dream come true kind of material for these dead
Mm,
characters. And also archives at places like the New York Public Library Special Collections, which just visiting that is a
mm,
trip.
mhm.
Talk about it being transported into the Gilded Age. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
Beautiful library. Um, and I digitize those. I have one of the zippy scanners that just sucks things in and turns it into a searchable digital file, and that really does help. Um,
What's
'Cause then
the
I can do.
what's the app that you use for that?
Oh well, it's actually just the really good scanner. There's no
Mm.
particular. Actually, the Apple operating system will do it for you.
Wow.
I actually use another app for audio material and or video material because I record a lot called Grain. It's a
Okay.
subscription online app, and you just load your recording up, and it gives you a transcript with a summary right
Oh,
back at you. It's a
fantastic.
super tool for
Yeah.
audio material, and I have something similar that does that with my text material. It's not
That sounds
100%,
to
but
be.
it's pretty good. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes I need to flip through pages, say, "Oh, that's what that word is," But it's that has cut my workflow down tremendously having those kinds of tools. But it's still a challenge when crime stuff because it was one a minute set of characters and locations, and now there's a book about garbage, all and trash and waste in places all over the country with an ensemble of characters. That's a whole different challenge, and it's kind of the same with soda. And Crime Story imposes its own structure on it. That's why it was a great way to start this journey of narrative writing. But then when the subject rather than the character or the event comes first, then it's much more challenging because we have to impose a
Mhm.
structure of some kind on the stories, and that
Yeah.
can be bedeviling sometimes.
I was going to ask, at what point does that structure on those kinds of books when do you find it? I mean, and
Oh, well,
what determines how you find it?
well, I come up with a working idea and a structural outline of the book early, but it inevitably changes. I rarely actually end up with the beginning that I started with. It'll be used somewhere in the book, but I realize midway through that it's not working, and I start, moving the dominoes, which is good
And is
though.
it character that determines it? I mean, what are the
Often
what are
it
the
is.
elements that
It's often character, and it's also a moment. You know, at some point, I want to talk with you about why I think this kind of storytelling is important, and often it's almost a moment of gestalt for a narrative that I think often becomes the key to organizing the whole story around.
go on? Explain more.
Well, it's this idea of, I think, that distinguishes narrative storytelling journalism from regular journalism is its emotional impact. Um, it's ability to make people feel something. Sometimes I just call it journalism with a heart. And I was thinking about what would be a succinct example to start with, and I was listening to Bonnie Raitt, who's one of my favorite singers, and a song came up called "Just Like That." And I actually saw her perform this live at the Greek Theater, and you could not hear a pin drop in an otherwise raucous concert venue. And she explained before she sang the song it was based on a true story about a woman who answers her door. And this is a woman who had been living in grief that she could not surmount for years over the loss of her son, the tragic death of her young son. And she opens the door and says, "Who are you? What do you want?" And he says, "Well, I've been looking for you." I can't even tell this without joking me up a little bit. I've been looking at you for years, and I finally found you. And it's okay. Well, why are you looking for me? And he says, "Well, I'm the man your son saved by giving me his heart." And the line in the song is, "Just like that, your life can change." If you hear that story and don't feel something, something's wrong with you. And it's because you're not
Yeah,
quick.
yeah,
You need, it's that instant empathy and feeling, and it's that ineffable thing about stories that how can a word on a page or in a song make us feel anything? We're not experiencing that. But it's because our brains are hardwired for stories. That's how we understand the world, whether we know it or not. They are empathy engines. And that's why I think narrative journalism is maybe one of the most important kinds of writing. And I'm not talking about my work, I'm talking about the genre that we
yeah,
have going right now because it helps us find our common humanity. And God knows we need that now. And that's the power and that's why I do this, because that's this thing I'm striving for: a true story, an important story, something that reveals something that we don't know or understand, and leads to a different kind of understanding of something, but also that makes us feel that common bond with the character, with the story, with the thing that
yeah.
happened.
And feel connected as human beings
Exactly.
too, which God knows we need. Yeah. Um,
Everyone in that auditorium, that Greek theater, that
mm,
beautiful outdoor venue in Los Angeles, was feeling it.
yeah,
They were on their
yeah,
feet in a
yeah,
very different way than a raucous applause. It was like paying homage to this shared moment. It was special, and I think that is what can be achieved
yeah.
through this kind of storytelling, and that's
Yeah.
that's that's why I think it's important.
Yeah, I was just reading a story yesterday about someone who had an organ transplant. Oh, it was 60 Minutes we were watching. The artist Amy Sherman, who did Michelle Obama's portrait. She has the heart of her heart was replaced, and every painting she signs with a heart for the woman whose life basically gave her life. It's exactly the same kind of story, and
Well,
it's just incredibly powerful.
it was that, well, I left out the most poignant part of that uh, art transplant story was that one moment she was lost in grief, and the next moment her head is pressed against this stranger's chest, listening to her son's heart. And it's beautiful.
Oh, oh
I
my
know.
God. Oh, yes, that is the beat right there. Oh, incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful song. It's a beautiful story, and when you can find, and they're not obviously they're not all that momentous, but you find that moment. It's either a pivotal early moment in in a narrative for me, or it's somehow the beginning of the larger story. Um,
Right. Right.
most a lot of good. I don't think good narrative nonfiction like good literature has to proceed in a linear way. The narrative can
Yeah.
be structured any way it makes sense to suck your reader into that experience. And
Do you do you always have that moment sort of before, like, is that part of the proposal situation?
no, no, that's what I'm saying. So for the Forever Witness, I struggled with how to begin this story about a 30-year-old murder and that happened in 1987, and that had just destroyed families, had was one of the Pacific Northwest most enduring mysteries, and how that was solved through, not through some major forensic endeavor, but through someone's family tree project online, and the person, this person's in California, 1,000 miles away, putting it together on their couch with their laptop, and I just how do you get into that story? And I had three or four different beginnings for that book, and I wasn't happy with any of them. My editor wasn't happy with any of them, and I agreed. And then I came across a reference. The most important character in the book is the detective, this cold case
Mhm.
detective, Jim Sharf. Just an amazing character, the kind of person you wish every police officer could be like this guy. He's like an expert marksman, won all these statewide contests, shooting contests, most deadly shot in Washington state. He has never used his firearm. He's never fired his gun in the
Oh,
line
wow.
of duty. I mean, you can't even make up a character like that.
Right.
Nobody would believe it. It's true. And he's just a wonderful human being. I'm biased, yes. I mean, sometimes you meet wonderful people and you write them that way because it's true. And I, midway through trying to write this book, I came across a reference in a police report back from he was a young deputy years before that he had driven on patrol right by the crime scene where one of the bodies was dumped and never knew it. And then when the body was found, he was off duty, so he never had anything to do with this crime, but it haunted him after that because he might have had the chance if he had been more observant. He faults himself. Nobody else does. That he might have been able to solve this crime sooner if he had noticed some sign while he passed by what seemed like an innocuous scene. And that became the moment to harken back to and introduce this character. It wasn't the very beginning of the book. It was the way a person who wasn't involved in the story until 17 years later after the crime. It was a way to involve him in real time with the key events that began the
Mm.
story. And that
Mm.
gave me the tools I needed to have a beginning of the book that included the main character, who otherwise didn't appear until page 100.
Yeah. Yeah.
Little things,
Oh.
but
Mhm.
a little bit of that magic, I guess, that some you find and you say, there it is. But it took over.
Right. Yeah. Fictional stories have carefully crafted endings, but that's not always possible with nonfiction. So I'm thinking of your book Burned, which is a whodunit that leaves us not everything is tied up at the end of that book. And how often does that happen where you go in? I mean, in The Forever Witness, you had such an incredibly satisfying ending. I mean, and
Yes,
I assume you knew that before you started the book, but
I didn't.
You didn't? Oh.
No, I sold it on however it comes out. It's still a good
Oh,
story.
wow.
Uh,
Yeah, well, you got lucky with that one.
I did. So yeah,
Yeah.
burned the incomplete resolution of the wrongful conviction case. This was a young mother who was sentenced to life in prison for supposedly burning her three young children to death by setting fire to their home. Although subsequent forensic evidence showed that there was no evidence to support that. It wasn't clear. It's hard to get somebody out of prison even when the evidence against them falls apart. And that
Yeah.
hadn't yet happened. After the book came out, it was released. But
Oh, she was. Oh, okay.
mhm.
I didn't realize that.
Yes. So yeah, but that is a challenge. And for some stories, some subjects, there really is no ending to I mean, there's no ending to if you're writing about the environment, about sustainability, it's kind of a never ending story. You're
Yeah.
suddenly saying, and today we fixed climate change, it's all that.
Mm.
And so that's where character is so essential, and why a narrative about something environmental can have a very satisfying ending, even as the insoluble problems become, no less insoluble, or maybe a little less insoluble, but not, you know, done. Um, and, but for instance, there's a character in the Forever Witness who not for in Total Garbage, who after 8 years, a single mom in Maine who's worked for a little nonprofit, worked for 8 years selling this idea called producer responsibility, where the creators of uh,
Mm.
polluting packaging, plastic stuff, have to be responsible for cleaning them up and recycling rather than taxpayers, which are the current one. And that basically retail politics, going town to town and selling this idea to a bunch of Mainers saying, "Want to put another tax on stuff?" And she'd say, "We're not putting a tax on something. We're just billing the people responsible for the problem. I mean, I make my kids clean up their room when they make a mess. That's all I'm asking." And it's kind of like a head scratching moment, a chin scratching moment, and then a realization that, hey, that actually kind of makes sense. It took 8 years. Maine became the first state in the country to pass a law shifting those costs to the packaging industry. It's getting ready to take effect now. It was like her life's work for such a big part of her career so far. She's an amazing person and the power of our personal choices as individuals and and persuading others to say, yeah, me too. Uh, that's a great story with a great ending. Even though the problem of plastic pollution is a big one that needs a lot more. It
And we'd like
shows.
it not to just be in Maine, but in every state in the country, which is highly
Well, it's
unlikely right
spreading. We
now.
got
But
we got nine, but it's
oh, okay, okay.
and the imperative for doing it is becoming increasingly clear now that we know we all have a teaspoon or more of plastics in our brains now. It's not to mention all we consume.
I'm afraid the government doesn't care, so I don't know how.
Well, they don't care
Uh,
until they can't not care, because this is, um, you know, plastics may become the new asbestos, which the government didn't care about for many years, and then it did because the death toll just could not be ignored.
well, you're an optimist. Maybe you're more optimistic than I am. I think
You work,
we're going to need a new government to care like that. But
then there's communities, there's states,
yeah,
there's places where things are happening. The most renewable. I found this out. You want to get a hopeful story from the that I found in Total Garbage, the most renewable state in the country in terms of how they make their power is Iowa. Where
that
our
is
erstwhile Homeland Security director and resident dog killer was governor.
right.
Under you can't you try and pry the windmills out of those farmers' cold dead fingers. It's not going to happen. So where you least expect it, amazing things are happening because it makes sense for them to happen and because they heard the right story. They don't care about climate change.
And that
What they
itself is
care
a great story.
that is, they care about,
Yeah.
man, wind is their only cash crop that never fails.
Yeah.
And it's enriching us and giving us independence. And hey, if the tree huggers like it, we don't care. We like it too. That's a
And every
story
time you
that is not
violate
being told enough.
expectations, yeah, every time you
Um,
violate expectations, it's a great story. So that itself,
yes,
yeah,
yes, people love that
yeah,
story.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I wrote years ago. I wrote a book about I wanted to call it The River Guide and the CEO, but the publisher wanted Force of Nature, which could be anything. It's a book about the partnership between a river guide who became a sustainability guru and the CEO of Walmart. And how
Mhm.
he was the architect of their attempts to be more sustainable. And they were real as opposed to the usual greenwashing. And so when
Right.
I was out talking about this book, I did all these red state locations, and someone once in Georgia asked, "Well, here's what I don't understand. Why should I go to the trouble of recycling? What's in it for me?" And I said, that's actually a really good question. And there's an expert right here in town you should talk to. There's tree huggers down at your local Walmart. Go ask them about why they're the greater recyclers than the city of San Francisco and Portland combined. And it's like, really? Out. I mean, if Walmart was doing it, and there must be a reason other than altruism because they don't do
Mhm.
anything for altruistic reasons. And it's exactly right. And that's another kind of storytelling that reached an audience in a different way
Right.
than normal, but works.
Right. We are we're running out of time, so I wanted to leave you with one last question, which everybody who's listening can maybe take advantage of, which is you teach narrative nonfiction at the college level, master's level,
I've done
graduate
both.
level.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the first assignment you give your students? How do you get
Oh,
them started?
I give them one guiding principle, which is don't give away the ending at the beginning. And then I hand them a reporter's notebook of an incident in Miami during the holiday shopping season when a shopper came out to their car and found as she's driving away there was a funny smell in the car. It turns out there was a odoriferous person in the car who
With
wanted
her.
to steal her purse. Yeah, and said, "Keep your hands on the wheel. Give me your purse," And instead, she like slammed on the gas, and this whole story unfolded about the. And I just give them this collection of facts as if from a reporter's notebook. I say, write a narrative about it. Well, these are all journalism students who learned the inverted pyramid of writing and have been ingrained on them. Give the who, what, where, when, and why right at the top, and then provide the details below. A classic news story. And even though I instructed them to do the opposite, most of them can't break out of how they normally tell a story. And then we read them aloud, and I'll have a good laugh. And there's usually something I can point to that is in some of the work that's what we're looking for kind of moment. I love this exercise. It's a lot of fun, but it shows starkly how to get out of their journalist mindset and into their storytelling mindset. And then I say, okay, how do you react to a joke when somebody reveals the punchline too soon? And then they go, oh. And that's how we start.
So, in your favorite of those versions, where does the story start about the woman who comes out and finds
Any
somebody in her
version
car?
in which I don't know how it turns out by the second paragraph, which is,
Okay. That raises the question up front and doesn't answer it.
yes, a little suspense is all I'm looking for. If they do that, it's a success.
Jeopardy. Well, no, when you start a fictional story, what you're looking for is conflict and stakes. Stakes, most importantly. You know, what's in jeopardy is usually a good place to begin.
And
Yeah.
and enough uncertainty for the suspension of disbelief to
Mhm.
enter the Because again, I firmly believe our brains are hardwired to be receptive to storytelling.
Yeah.
And so if you can just observe those conventions, you'll suck people in.
100%. Another one of my bylines is interrogate the weird. So,
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna
yeah,
steal that.
yeah. So
So
the story that you just told to get them going has some weird to it,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that you can
Oh, and he
run
was
with
really
that.
polite too,
Oh,
the guy in the back seat.
oh, it's very funny. And this has been really, really great. A very memorable conversation, and I want to thank everybody who's joined us. Again, we're going to post the video at the end of the week, along with a transcript and a summary of all the terrific points that Ed has shared with us about narrative nonfiction. I want to thank you all, and especially want to thank you, Ed. And we will see you again next time.
Anytime. Thanks, Megan.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.